The remote northern tip of Newfoundland seems to have been forgotten by the rest of the world. The primary activity is fishing, and in summer, a tourist industry that plays up the region's connections to the ancient Vikings who used to roam these seas.
Many mysteries are hidden in the depths of our oceans. But for the town of Lanza Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, one doesn't have to look beneath the waves for one of the strangest tales to ever come from the sea.
Much of the fishing that was done in Newfoundland was done from small open boats using hand lines. It was very difficult, back-breaking work. One particular August, the fishermen experienced a good catch. Indeed, it was the finest catch of the season. One fisherman in particular had stayed late one evening down at his fishing premises, gutting, salting, and cleaning his fish. He suddenly heard a noise coming from the water. It sounded like paddles in the water, or the dipping of oars. At first he couldn't see anything, and then he heard a very strange noise indeed. It sounded like a horn blowing, the sound of a victory or battle cry. Then he looked out, and he saw a ship the likes of which he had never seen. It was a ship that certainly did not belong to anyone he knew in the community or along the shoreline. It was a boat that he had never seen in his life. It was a long, open, narrow boat with one central mast and a striped sail, a planked hull, and along either side, a row of oarsmen. It came closer and closer and then vanished. No one knew where it had come from or where it had gone. The man wondered where the boat had come from, and it was not until afterwards, when he was looking through pictures in a book, that he discovered a drawing of a boat that looked very similar to the one he had seen. It was a drawing of a boat that had come from Scandinavia, from the Viking territories almost 1,000 years before. The term Vikings is used to refer to the Nordic-speaking peoples of southern Scandinavia, who raided, traded, and settled in the early years of the 11th century, 500 years before Christopher Columbus. They moved westward from their home in Europe to Iceland and then Greenland, and then eventually to the shores of Newfoundland, finally reaching the spot that today is known as Lanza Meadows. There are powerful myths surrounding the mysterious history of the Vikings in America. Those who feared their sharp iron weapons helped fuel the reputation of the Vikings as a ferocious breed who raped and plundered their way to the New World. Yet the image that remains today, while barbaric, is paradoxically adventurous and heroic. There's a story told about two hard tickets, two young ne'er-do-wells, who learned of some whiskey that had been hidden in an older man's fishing premises. So one August evening, these two young men went down and they broke into the shed to steal the man's whiskey. Once they were inside, they heard a noise coming from the water, and thinking that someone had disturbed them, they looked out the window to see where the sound had come from. It sounded like the sound of paddles dipping in water. When they looked out, they saw a ship approaching. They left the building, and as they went out, this strange, long ship turned in the water and went straight towards them. They were so frightened by this that they left the whiskey behind and fled the scene. At first, they told no one about what they had seen, but eventually, word spread about this ship that they had seen in the harbor. And it was realized that the Viking ghost ship had been seen before 30 years on the exact same day, August 15th. The first time the ship had been seen, it had come almost as good tidings of a bountiful catch. The second time, it had come as good tidings as well, for it had saved the old man's whiskey. That was not the last that anyone saw of the strange Viking ship. Years later, it was a particularly good day of fishing, and all the men had caught a great deal of fish. One fisherman decided that he would stay a little bit longer on the fishing grounds to catch as many fish as he could, and stayed there long after the other men had returned home. The weather eventually started to turn bad. The clouds covered the skies, and the man decided that he too would return to the safety of the harbor. Try as he might, however, he could not get the motor on the boat to start. He tried everything. There was enough fuel left in the tank. He checked all the connections, and everything seemed to be in working order. Suddenly he heard a strange noise, like the sounds of paddles dipping in the water. And he looked up to see a huge Viking ship bearing down on him. The Viking ship seemed to be on a collision course with a smaller vessel. And at the last moment, just when it seemed as if the Viking ship was about to ram and break the man's fishing boat, he heard the majestic sound of a horn blowing as if it was a battle call. The Viking ship then vanished, and the man was overcome with a great sense of well-being. And the motor started up immediately, and he was able to make his way back to shore. The date was August the 15th.
It's still a mystery why the ghostly ship is seen every 30 years, and why always the same day, August 15th. Perhaps the spirits of the adventurous Viking sailors, once the nomads of the North Atlantic, continue to explore the coast they visited so many years before, even if now it's from the world beyond.
In 1912, Titanic sank. 328 victims were recovered. 209 were brought back to Halifax. Many of those recovered were laid out in the Mayflower curling rink, but the wealthy ones were laid out in Snow's funeral home. 5 years later, even a greater disaster took place. 2 ships collided in Halifax Harbor. A Belgian relief ship, the Emile, hit a French ship, Mont Blanc, a munition ship. 25 minutes later, an explosion occurred, making it the largest man-made explosion before the atomic bomb. An estimated 2,000 people were killed instantaneously. Many of the victims were brought to Snow's funeral home. So many, in fact, that they had to be stacked outside like cordwood. Now the building is one of the most prestigious restaurants in all of Halifax, the Five Fishermen. Because they met a very violent and unexpected death, it is speculated that their spirits are still roaming through the building.
I've been working at the Five Fishermen restaurant for a number of years now. Over the past few years, there have been some strange occurrences here. For example, objects that seem to move on their own, glasses falling off the bar when they really no reason to be, nobody threw them. Faucets turning on and off in the kitchen by themselves, seemingly. One time a fork just seemed to come flying off a table on its own. That was a little creepy, and there were some other experiences that were very frightening. There was one evening I was by the salad bar, and as I was passing, I felt this just thorough chill go through me. So I was standing around looking and feeling a little confused, and the next thing I knew, something or someone reached out and slapped me across the face. I, of course, turned and looked. There was absolutely nobody in sight. I was by myself at the salad bar. I was very alarmed by this. I went to the staff, told them what happened, and they pointed out that I had a red mark on my face from where I had been slapped by nothing. And this is probably the first occurrence that I remember where this ghost or spirit actually came in physical contact with somebody in the restaurant. These incidences usually occur around closing very late at night when there's nobody else in the restaurant, just the staff. I believe there's a spirit or some sort of ghost inhabiting the restaurant.
Leonard Curry has been employed there for over 25 years and has seen and heard many unusual things.
When I first started working here at the Five Fishermen, I was responsible for setting up the salad bar. And one afternoon, in the middle of the summer, nice sunshiny day, I was setting up the salad bar. I was bringing a tray around the bar, and on one sweep by, I heard a crash.
He put down everything he was doing, turned to investigate. He saw an ashtray on the floor that had obviously been pushed. When he bent down to pick it up, he saw a reflection in the mirror.
In the mirror, I could see an old man. And I turned around to look, and he wasn't there. I looked back to the mirror, and there was nobody there.
This turned out to be one of many times employees have seen images reflected in this mirror. One evening, one of the busboys was in there working when a gentleman approached him. He assumed it was a customer's, and he struck up a conversation with him. They talked for about a minute or two.
He eventually turned away to talk to the other busboy. When he turned back, the gentleman was gone. He said to the busboy, "Where did that gentleman go?" And the other busboy said
that there was no gentleman there. He had never been there. And the busboy had been standing there talking to himself for the last couple of minutes. On another occasion, two female staff were working alone in the restaurant. One was upstairs and one was down.
Hi, my name's Kim. I've worked here for about 3 years now. One night I was working here after hours, and I swear I thought I saw someone go into the private room. So I call my friend Tina, who's working with me. And I get her to go into the room with me. We go in there, and there's no one there. Thing is, there's no way out of that room, and I swear I saw someone go in there. I really can't explain what happened that night.
So imagine a staff member at this restaurant late at night, tired, been a long day, knows that many bodies have been in this building, knows probably that there are ghost stories associated with it. Not only is that person's reality testing likely to be at a low because of fatigue and so forth, but suggestibility is likely to be at a high because it's late at night. That's when ghosts appear, we are told. It's an old building, many bodies were there, and the person becomes a bit more anxious. And that anxiety, combined with suggestibility, combined with the stories, again, perfect recipe for interpreting any kind of strange noise or light as a sign of a ghost.
The ghosts at the Five Fishermen focus their energies towards the staff before the restaurant is open or after it is closed.
My name is Michelle Ortez, and I've worked at the Five Fishermen restaurant for about a year now. I definitely think this place has an eerie presence of some sort. One night while closing the dining room, I was setting a table and I heard a knocking at the window. I looked up and saw a filmy, sort of translucent figure outside of the window. Thought I was a little overtired maybe. It was late at night. I went back to setting a table and heard a knocking on the window again. Looked up and this filmy object was still out there. So I walked towards the window thinking, that it might be somebody trying to do some sort of trick on us or some sort. And there was nothing there. We're on the second floor. There's no possible explanation of what it could have been. Another night while closing the dining room, I was out by the salad bar making sure that everything was done up there. I heard two voices, a man and a woman, arguing in our private room. Not very loudly, but just loud enough that I could hear them. Went over to check what it was, thinking it might have been a couple servers, talking about the evening. There was no one in there. The restaurant was completely empty at that time. And there was no one else on this floor other than myself. When these occurrences have happened to me, the first couple times it was very eerie, very scary. After a while it's not as bad, you almost get used to it.
So this one evening, I was here and I was standing at the maitre d' stand with the maitre d'. And I thought I saw some shadowy figure go down the stairs, but then I figured it must be the lighting or something. It could not be real. And the maitre d' turns to me and says, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yes." totally creeped me out. Well, the maitre d' and I were talking about it later, and we think maybe it's some of the ghosts that people have seen around here.
2 waitresses were carrying plates back to the kitchen. As they're walking down the hall, this image appeared out of nowhere. It seemed to be a solid image, but it glided across the floor and appeared to go through them. This startled both women.
Sometimes in the summer, when it's completely hot outside and hot inside the restaurant, you'll get a cold breeze that goes right through you and chills you. It's hard to explain because everything around you is hot, but then you're completely cold.
Another terrifying occurrence happened. A female staff member was walking through the 2nd floor when this force, an undescribable force, slammed her up against the wall. She was held there, unable to move. She started to scream. One of the male staff members ran upstairs to see if he could help her. And then another force slammed up against him, and he fell to the floor. And then it stopped. The force disappeared. She was released from the wall. She ran from the building. Never gone to the 2nd floor since.
The Five Fishermen restaurant in Halifax, that has quite a background. It was a funeral home. And in the time of the Halifax explosion, many of the dead were stored and prepared there. And with the sinking of the Titanic, many of the wealthier dead people were stored and prepared there. So that building would have had a lot of grief, a lot of survivors crying over their deceased loved ones. And now it's a restaurant and people see things. They see people in period costumes. It also has a well-known history in the area, so people expect to see these things. So it could be a mixture of the 2 things. You know, expectation, fueled by stories of friends, relatives, and the history of the place.
It's unusual how this spirit doesn't seem to want to show itself to anybody except us, those of us who are here every day.
It's as if the ghosts are playing tricks on us, you know, just trying to let us know that they're still around. And they're not here to hurt us or anything like that, though. They've become our friends.
The Five Fishermen is known for its excellent food, and for the staff who are more than willing to share their personal ghost stories.
Many parts of the Great Lakes carry strange tales about ghosts and lost ships. One area is off of Kingston, known as Dead Man Bay, and lying within the bay is Cedar Island. 2 young women who were camping on the island had a very strange encounter. They were walking along the shore when they noticed a woman standing near the tower. The woman seemed to be scanning the horizon, searching for something. The first thing they noticed was her clothing, which seemed to be from at least 100 years ago. The woman finally looked at the 2 campers and simply vanished into thin air. The poor women quickly fled the island for good. Cedar Island has a very well-known documented ghost story going back to the 1840s. It was Irish stonemasons during the potato famine that were working on a gunnery or Cathcart tower on the island. Robert James was a young Irish stonemason who had arrived from Ireland to begin work on the tower. He was well respected amongst his workers and the townspeople of Kingston. The stonemasons worked 6 days a week. On their day off, they would arrive in Kingston and stay in barracks or local inns. It was during one of his days off that Robert went into Kingston and met a local innkeeper's daughter named Elizabeth. Robert fell in love at first sight, and Elizabeth did the same. The father thought Robert made an excellent suitor, and shortly thereafter the 2 were engaged to be married. Knowing he had a bright future, Robert worked tirelessly on the tower. And meanwhile, Elizabeth waited and waited for that wonderful day when the 2 would be wed. Yet tragedy lurked in the form of a freak storm. The men unwisely continued finishing their task before leaving for Kingston. They waited too long. A storm was quickly brewing in Dead Man's Bay. They all jammed into one boat. The overloaded vessel and the rough water was a determining factor for the death of most of the men. The boat capsized, and few survivors were ever found. But Robert wasn't one of them. Search boats were sent out to find the survivors. Unfortunately, Robert wasn't one of the lucky ones. Many of the bodies were located in the bay. However, the tide returned to take the bodies back out, never to be found again.
To this day, we still believe that there are some in the water, perhaps still down at the bottom, have never made it to their homes or their beloveds. And this bay, which was called Hamilton Cove until then, has forever since been known as Dead Man Bay.
Poor Elizabeth refused to accept the news of the death of Robert. She continued to walk down to the shoreline and gaze out over the water, waiting for his return. Although he would never return. Grief-stricken, Elizabeth refused to eat. Eventually, she perished of a broken heart. A new crew had to be hired to finish Cathcart Tower, and this is when the strange occurrences began. Workers soon reported seeing a woman on the island, especially around the tower. She seemed to be looking for something. Even soldiers stationed at Fort Henry would report seeing a mysterious woman walking along the Kingston shoreline, staring out across the bay at Cedar Island. Some campers even report seeing a man and woman together walking Cedar Island. Could it be Robert and Elizabeth? That they found one another? It would seem that the love between Robert and Elizabeth was so strong that they were united together after death in Dead Man Bay.
Well, when you've got a place named Dead Man Bay and you've got a legend of love and loss and so forth, again, you've set up a perfect situation for people who are inclined to want to believe in ghost stories, to see things that will make them think they've seen the ghosts. If you were to change the name to Beautiful Bay and not tell anybody the legend, I'd be quite willing to bet that no one will ever report that particular ghost story, or probably they'll be unlikely to see any ghosts at all. But you set up the expectation with the name and the legend, and then the mind plays on any kind of ambiguous stimulus to fill in the details to give you your ghost.
There are other frightening legends that revolve around Dead Man Bay. Sunken ships that still lie restless beneath the water. The sunken ships in Dead Man Bay are so close to the surface that you can actually touch them with an oar. Many of the crews that perished with these ships in Dead Man Bay were actually associated with what we call a press gang. They were young people that were taken off the streets by the British or United States officials. They were clobbered over the head, and when they awakened, they were employed in the service of Her Majesty's Navy. Legend has it that these press gangs would awaken from the depths of the water and attempt to employ anyone they could find on the surface. And legend continued to be told that when a person went missing or drowned in Dead Man Bay, it was the press gangs that got them.
There were stories that all the parents told of kids who'd wandered into the woods at night, had come too close to the bay, that the ships would, on a dark and stormy night, rise out of the bottom, and that the skeleton crews would come ashore and press gang anybody they found, to haul them off, drag them into the waters, and they'd never be seen again.
Legend has it that children have actually lost their lives at night on the shore of Dead Man Bay. The press gangs are awake, and looking for souls.
I don't know if that was true or not, but we certainly were afraid of coming down here, especially on a dark or stormy night, as they say.
Parents all over the world make up stories to keep their kids away from situations that might be dangerous. You know, don't go down to the mill at night because the bogeyman might get you. It's a good way to keep children from going where they might get into trouble. And so the story of these ships just off the coast, 8 feet underwater, the story that the press gangs used to come out of them and get people and drag them underwater sounds like one of those stories. Well, stay away from the water, kids. And here's a good way to make you stay away. We'll tell you a scary story. But it seems to be confirmed by these boats that have been obviously there for a long time and they're underwater.
I know that when I was a child growing up along these shores that we used to try to frighten each other or scare each other into coming down here and seeing how long one would last. Any one of us who did, I wasn't among them unfortunately, quite often came back with stories of strange whisperings, calls, splashes in the water, figures being seen along the shoreline, strange lights perhaps from lanterns of the press crew. I couldn't say myself, but then I wouldn't be down here after dark.
I think you have the combination of a cautionary tale plus some physical objects, the boats, that seem to make this thing very real and very interesting to people. But what data do you have? You've got some scuttled ships and a story, that's all. However, if people are in that area, especially late at night when we tend to be more anxious and we tend to be more prone to suggestibility, it's not surprising that someone or another from time to time will hear or see something that's interpreted as one of the members of the British press gang. There'll never be any photographs, of course, there'll never be any good evidence, but that will feed the story for the next generation. It'll go on and on.
Whether these legends originated from parents attempting to scare their children or by rum runners who are working the bay at night, the tales of Dead Man Bay continue to this day. And this makes Dead Man Bay one of the greatest Canadian ghost stories of all time. For nearly 2 centuries, a strange phenomena has been occurring on Mahone Bay. Sightings of a ghost ship burning. People claim it to be the Young Teaser, a privateer ship that burned in the harbor.
The Young Teaser was an American privateer. A privateer was a licensed pirate, a vessel given permission to hunt enemy ships for capture. The Young Teaser was a 2-masted schooner. She was built specifically for privateering. She had 2 spars of Norway pine. She was built of American oak. She was lined with cork in order to prevent the splinters from the broadsides coming in and hurting the crew. She had 5 guns on board. She was fast, meant to be a rapid raider. She came to Nova Scotia shores during the War of 1812, coming here in June 1813. Her captain was William Dobson, and when she arrived in the waters off Lunenburg and into the Mahone Bay, she had a crew of 26 on board. That particular morning, the people from Lunenburg watched with great care as they saw the 2 ships coming across the bay. They were worried because some years before the town had been raided by privateers, and this might mean another raid. As they watched the events of the day unfold, the American privateer was cornered in the Mahone Bay by 2 British warships. One, the frigate Orpheus, and the other, a ship of the line, a 3-decker named La Hogue. And Johnson gave his word that he would not again take up arms against the British. And if he were caught on the Young Teaser, then the punishment for him was hanging. And they were hoping under the cover of darkness to slip out of the bay between Tancook and the Blandford shore. However, that was not to be, for La Hogue lowered 5 of her boats away, and they began rowing toward the teaser. As the teaser's crew saw the British ships coming, one in particular watched with great anxiety. Frederick Johnson had been the lieutenant of the teaser. So he, more nervous than the others, went into the galley of the teaser and took a coal from the stove and ran forward and threw it into the magazine.
The powder magazine exploded and the ship burned into the night. Residents were horrified to see such a sight. It was shortly after this that residents sighted the young teaser burning in Mahone Bay. Rescue ships were launched. However, when they arrived on the scene, the teaser was gone.
There is a phenomenon called St. Elmo's fire. When there's electrically charged clouds, there can be what appears to be fire around the mast of a sailing ship. So that could certainly lead to these stories. And that's a natural event. The fact that there are fewer sightings now than there were in the past, I think is highly indicative that perhaps what people did see up till the 1930s could have been the St. Elmo's fire, because they had tall-masted vessels up until about the 30s. Then after that, yachts and different kinds of fishing boats. Most people in that area know the story of the pirate ship, which certainly has an air of infamy and adventure, etc. Could lead to these stories.
When this ghost ship appears, people claim to see men standing on deck engulfed in flames. Could this be the crew of the young teaser? A group of men sentenced to death by a young lieutenant who wanted to avoid his own hanging? Many claim it to be the truth. What a selfish man, this young lieutenant, commander of this ship, knowing that his own life would be taken, and yet he decided that everyone would die if he was going to. No wonder the young teaser appears burning on the horizon, and the crew standing engulfed in flames to this day.
In 1939, my parents were walking along the western shore of the Mahone Bay and noticed a ship on fire on a June evening. They thought it was a pulp boat hauling pulpwood out of the mouth of the Gold River, and they stopped along with others and watched for 15 minutes or so, and some people prepared to launch a dory and row out to see if they could be of assistance. And all of a sudden there was just like a great explosion, but not a sound, and the whole apparition disappeared.
When we had moved to Cheston, we knew the story of the teaser. And
we were out for an evening stroll, probably close to dusk, around 8 o'clock in the evening, and we were just coming down around the foot of King Street in Chester by the Yacht Club, and my husband said, look out there, around Round Island there's something burning, and we stopped and we looked. First of all, we thought it was an island burning or somebody burning bush or something, and we both realized it was the shape of a boat.
Shape of a schooner. So when we watched it for a little while, we even knocked on neighbors' doors and got them to come out and confirm the fact that what we were seeing was what they could see. So it was kind of that's why it was such a thrill to think that there it was. There's the famous teaser.
We watched it for about 20 minutes, and we called friends to take a look, and they saw the same thing that we did. In fact, they said that they'd been out in a whaler the next morning to see if they could find some remnants of burning, like some field on fire, or they could find no evidence at all.
It would seem that the crew of the young teaser have decided in goodwill to save other people's lives. The young teaser is sighted often when a ship is lost at sea. Lost ships follow this light to the safety of the shore.
To this very day, people report seeing a burning ship on the waters of the Mahone Bay. It flares and burns at a distance. By the time that people go to investigate, the ship has vanished. There's no evidence of fire anywhere. And they have seen the ghost of the American privateer, Young Teaser.
The Young Teaser continues to be an enduring story in the hearts of those residents along Mahone Bay. Each year they build a replica of the Young Teaser, hold a celebration, and set the ship on fire. It's a story that is being kept alive and may continue for the next 200 years.
On one beautiful clear night, a couple was relaxing around a campfire. The area was very secluded, so they were surprised to see a man walking towards them. The man was dressed oddly, as if he were in clothing from another time. The figure continued to walk toward them. And when the man reached the edge of the fire, he did not stop, but he walked straight through the campfire as if it weren't there. He simply kept walking, ignoring the flames and the people. The couple ran for their car, terrified by the encounter. New River Beach is a beautiful seacoast community in New Brunswick. There are several tales of hauntings on or around New River Beach. A lost sailor who beckons people, a beautiful woman who is glimpsed on the rocky cliffs, and the ghosts who haunt a nearby mansion called the Night House. All of these hauntings are connected to the tragic sinking of the ship Genii.
Now, the Genii seem to have been ill-fated from the beginning. The plan was to launch the ship on a Friday, which was considered the worst day to do so. The ship had been under construction for 3 building seasons, which was also considered bad luck, and when it was finally slid down the ways, the ship landed on its side instead of a proper entry into the water. Nonetheless, the ship was fitted out in St. Andrews, taken on a trial run around the island of Grand Manan. Everything seemed to be okay, and off they went to New River Beach and the night mill where they were to load deals. When they sailed up the bay in December of 1868 and arrived off New River Island, they had on board 4 sailors, or 4 experienced seamen, and 7 men from Mascarene whose job was to unload the ballast stone and load the deals. They had no experience as sailors at all. And this may have led to the tragedy that was to follow. After they had unloaded the ballast, they went into Haggerty's Cove to have a few drinks. The pilot, the man who knew the waters the best, had a little too much to drink and stayed in Haggerty's Cove for the night. But the 11 men, their captain, went back aboard the ship. It was a calm evening, but it wasn't to stay that way for this tremendous gale that was blowing up the coast of Maine and entering the Bay of Fundy. When it struck the ship, it struck with a vengeance. with only 4 experienced men aboard, it flipped over in the storm and dragged into the cove by Knight's Mill. There, 4 men were found the next morning in the cove. The rest of the men, they were found along the shore of New River Beach within the next day or two. The Genii, when it came ashore, it was just in front of the Knight house. And this was where the first 4 bodies were brought up so that the coroner could come from St. George and examine the bodies. One body, though, did not show up for about 6 weeks later. That was the body of John Ryu. And his body drifted in the opposite direction of tides and winds and ended up at what they called at that time Barnabas Point. Today, that particular area is called Dead Man's Cove.
Almost immediately, stories began to be told about a ragged sailor who had been seen wandering the beach. Those who saw him claimed that he called out and beckoned them to come closer, but few did. The sailor seemed confused, as if he didn't know how he had come to be there. Since the sailor was seen at Dead Man's Cove, people decided he must be John Ryu, the sailor whose body washed up on shore. These stories have continued to the present day.
I always wondered about the story. Then last winter, doing some research, I came across the actual finding of the body of John Ryu in Barnabas Head, or on Barnabas Head, in this cove that at that time had no name and which is now known as Dead Man's Cove. I concluded from this that this story of John had been in the community as a folk tale or folklore for many, many years, and that there was in fact some substance to that story.
One woman submitted a very frightening report to the local police department. She was driving past New River Beach when she saw a man standing in the road. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. She slammed on her brakes but was certain she had hit him. She ran from the car to see if he was injured, but there was nobody there. The van was undamaged and the police later found no sign of anyone. The woman was very frightened and embarrassed. Ironically, this would not be her last encounter with the ghosts of New River Beach. There's another ghost that walks the beach at New River. The same woman who had the vehicle encounter went to the shore one day. She saw a woman step out onto the high rocks about 20 yards away. The rocks are very treacherous, and she was concerned that the woman might jump, as she seemed very distraught. The woman turned toward her, and the moment they made eye contact, the mysterious woman vanished. There have been multiple encounters with this mystery woman, who always seems to be glimpsed on the high cliffs. One witness had gone down to the shore to meet a friend of his when he glimpsed the woman standing on the high rocks. Fearing that the woman might be suicidal, he called to her and ran to stop her.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
His friend on the other side of the rocks heard the yelling and looked up and clearly saw the woman. He ran to help her. When the first man got to the top, he saw the woman vanish. He thought she must have jumped, but there was no sign of her on the rocks below. Both men had seen the same thing, but there was nobody there. There is one possible explanation. Records in the area indicate that the wife of one of the Geni's crew was shattered by the loss. She spent her days staring out into the ocean, hoping that he would return, even though he had been buried months ago. Eventually, her sadness became too much for her to bear, and she climbed these very rocks and threw herself off into the sea.
Well, you got all the ingredients here for a great ghost story. A ship that goes down with all hands on board, bodies washed onto the shore, one body missing. What could have happened to that body? That body eventually sweeps up on shore as well. Then you've got a windswept beach, and over the course of time, lots of opportunity for people to either imagine ghostly figures walking down the beach at night because they're feeling kind of nervous and expecting ghosts, or perhaps to see some stranger walking down the beach and interpret this as the ghost of the dead sailor or the dead sailor's wife or lover.
The beach is not the only haunted spot. Atop the cliffs is the night house, where the crew of the Genii was laid out. The house has remained haunted since that tragic day.
I'm Phyllis Farquharson, and I moved into this house back in 1984. It was known as the Night House at that time.
Phyllis recalled one very unusual experience. She had come home from work early and was exhausted. There were heavy curtains throughout the house, used to keep out the draft, but it was a warm day, so she left them open. She hung her coat up and left the closet door open to air and went upstairs. She was on the phone when she heard noises downstairs. She clearly heard the sound of curtains being pulled shut and of a heavy door slamming. She asked her friend to stay on the line and went downstairs to investigate. As she came down the stairs, the noises stopped and the house became completely silent. She discovered that the closet door had been slammed shut and that the curtains had been pulled closed. She was the only person in the house. Doors opening and closing were very common phenomena. Often Phyllis would be upstairs and would hear the doors continuously slamming shut. The noise would stop the instant somebody came down the stairs.
Things would move around in the house too. You'd put something down and you'd go back for it and it wouldn't be there.
Certain objects seemed to attract the ghost at the night house, especially antiques. Phyllis was brushing her hair with an antique brush she had been given. She set the brush down and left the room for a moment. As she was walking down the hall, she felt as if she were being watched, just a feeling, a presence near her. She turned back to her room and found that the brush had been moved from the dresser to the bed. This was not the first time that this had happened. The new owners of the night house have not had any ghostly experiences. Maybe the renovation of the night house has allowed the ghosts of the Genii to move on. New River Beach is a very unique ghost story where one tragic event has led to 3 documented hauntings. Whether it is the lost sailor, or the lady on the cliff, or the hauntings of the night house, there are too many reports to dismiss the tales of New Brunswick's most haunted beach.
The Princess Mary restaurant vessel on dry land became a very popular place through the 1950s and 1960s. The whole place is very haunted. Not unusual really, because ships can be very haunted places.
A waitress that used to work here, she was heading up to the storage room, which used to be the wheelhouse when this was a boat. And she was getting some stuff for the kitchen, and she looked up to the rafters and she saw a woman hanging there. And the woman opened her eyes and looked at her, and it totally freaked her out. So she looked away, and then when she looked back, the woman was gone. So she brushed it off, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her. The exact same woman that she saw hanging there walked past her in the hallway. I believe it's haunted. There's several people that have died on the ship, and I don't think they're ready to go anywhere soon. I believe this is their home.
There seems to be something about one of the components of the old ship itself, perhaps the Venezuelan oil tanker. It's said that the wife of a former captain had committed suicide by hanging herself in the old wheelhouse.
Today, we boast that we have a resident ghost that comes around and does different things around the Princess Mary. Some of the examples are rattling dishes, footsteps when there's nobody there, and many different little things that go on, and we just take it for granted that there's a female ghost around and she's friendly, and we live with her on a day-to-day basis.
The Princess Mary is a favorite ship in Victoria. It was a coastal steamer built in Scotland. It arrived in Victoria just before World War I. A very well-known sight until the early 1950s when the ship needed lots of repairs. It was being scrapped at Capital Iron in downtown Victoria, and directly across the harbor, Harold Elworthy operated Island Tug and Barge. Elworthy needed a place for his staff in the growing business to have coffee on their lunch breaks, and he saw the saloon as being a pretty good place. And as time went on, their business expanded and they needed to add more. And so part of a wooden ferry was brought in and added to the old ship. And then a Venezuelan oil tanker became part of it as well.
A couple of the other things that have happened on the Princess Mary when it was in service was there was 2 sailors that had hung themselves also in 2 cabins, and 2 people had drowned that we have know of, and we have them documented.
Mr. Lang and I were working upstairs. It used to be the wheelhouse.
It was approximately 10:30 at night, and we were taking inventory, and we had locked up the rest of the ship, and there was nobody else in the building.
All of a sudden, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. We both turned to each other and said, "Did you hear that?" And we both got up, walked outside, out the room, no one in sight. But I still, to this day, remember those footsteps.
Well, the Princess Mary restaurant story is an interesting one. Of course, you got all the elements here. Ships have often been associated with hauntings and ghost stories. And then the legend, of course, of the woman who hung herself. All these elements provide a good setting for ghost stories. Now, ghost stories often come about because people perceive things late at night, and they like to think that perhaps ghosts only come out after dark. But what happens is that after dark, we become much more anxious. We depend very much on visual stimulation for our sense of security in the world. And in the dark, we can't obviously have the same sense of security we have when the lights are on. So even in semi-darkness, we're much more likely to be a little bit anxious, a little bit more prone to anxiety, and certainly more prone to misinterpret stimuli, whether it's the creaking of pipes or whatever, as being something sinister, something that justifies the anxiety we're feeling. In the context of a place that's supposedly haunted, our brains quickly jump to, that's the ghost.
Adjacent to the new second-floor banquet room is an old area, part of the old Venezuelan oil tanker. It's used now for storage, and only staff have access to it. One of the servers for a club luncheon one day was walking through that storage room.
And as I walked up to the upper level, there was a man in the back. And I was in a hurry, so I didn't pay too much attention. And then I stopped him and said, there was a man there. What is he doing out there? Because it's a service area, nobody goes there. So I turned back and I said, excuse me, can I help you? And he was gone. I went back afterwards, double-checked. No one was in the room, and it's a mystery.
The kitchen seems to be a very haunted place as well. In fact, that's where most of the hauntings take place in the Princess Mary. At first, it was just small things. The staff began to notice the kitchen utensils suddenly going missing. They appear at the end of the day exactly as they were once located, but on the opposite side of the room. No one had done it, and if that happened just once or twice, it might be written off as a strange quirk, but it happens all the time. The lady who washes dishes, who's been there for a number of years, says that sometimes when she steps away just for a moment, with the dishes piled up, she comes back and discovers that they're all done. And it happens very often.
Myself and another chap, Henry, were working in the kitchen. We had noticed that our dishwasher had left, so there was nobody else in the kitchen. It was just Henry and I. We seen an escargot dish fly off 10 to 12 feet against the convection oven on the other side. So even if it fell off the shelf, it would never get that momentum. So we both stood there in awe in the middle of this big rush, and we could not believe our eyes. We were heading out home, and we walked down into the large banquet room that we have at the Princess Mary. And I looked across to see a white streak run down through the original part of the ship, and then it disappeared. So needless to say, we were very upset and very scary at that event.
The most unusual experience, I would say, was on an afternoon, more busy than usual. I was serving quite a few tables, and I had a tray full of coffee on my plate. And as I was walking through the restaurant, one of the cups literally jumped up like there was a spring underneath it and spun through the air. It landed straight on the ground, right side up, without spilling a drop. There was nothing on me, nothing on my tray. The carpet was dry. It was unbelievable.
Have passengers from days gone by returned to the old ship just for one last ride? Or is it the wife of the captain of the Venezuelan oil tanker, now an addition to the old restaurant vessel? There's so many things that make the ship haunted. And even the new parts seem to attract ghosts. I think the Princess Mary will be haunted for a very long time.
The Constellation's first ghost sighting dates back to 1861.
Perhaps the best documented story pertaining to this ship occurred during the Civil War and appears in the diary and journals of some of the ship's crew. The story talks about a fellow who was locked in the ship's brig and who saw two of his fellow shipmates who had died recently appear before him. Attention was brought to this when the fellow in the brig began to sing.
It's all for me beer and tobacco, for a spent all me tin on lasses drinking gin.
When the Marine Guard arrived and asked him why he was making such a sound, and he told the guard that the two sailors who had appeared had commanded him to sing so that they could dance. Now, of course, there was nothing there for the Marine to see, but he did find 5 buckets that were stacked very awkwardly, and despite the pitch of the ship and its movement, refused to fall.
You have to remember that people back in the mid-19th century were very superstitious, and I should say sailors were extremely superstitious because there was so much at sea that was unknown. And so they probably thought that this was as a result of the ghost of the cook's apprentice. So, they probably thought it was true, and who knows, it might be.
No one's ever tried to scientifically explain ghosts before, and that's pretty much exactly what we're trying to do here. This is an electromagnetic field detector. Specifically, it's a single-axis electromagnetic field detector, and is used for detecting electromagnetic fields. This multimeter here converts the voltage into a field of measurement called milligauss, which is the measurement used for measuring magnetic fields. We use these devices like this, which is a thermocoupler thermometer. It uses differences in the electrical resistance of the air to give you an accurate air temperature reading. What's great about this is it detects the air temperature 3 times every second, so it's very fast. It's very, very accurate.
So this is actually a helium-filled balloon, and underneath here we actually have a little pinhole camera, and it's remote control operated so that we can actually fly it into different locations and get images that we need to get that we can't actually walk into ourselves.
Vince Wilson and his team let the hot air balloon camera loose. choosing to concentrate on this technological device as the primary instrument of their ghost hunt. For 3 hours, this remote control camera moved silently below the decks of the Constellation, but no anomalies were picked up. The team chose to focus on the area where the ghost of a former captain of the Constellation has been repeatedly seen.
According to legend, Captain Truxton, who was the captain of the previous USS Constellation, the Revolutionary War era Constellation, he found one of the sailors sleeping on duty. And it was not uncommon for lethal punishments to be made onto the sailors at the time. People believe that they have seen Captain Truxton's ghost on the current manifestation of the USS Constellation. I don't know if it's been pointed out yet, but this is not the original Constellation. This ship is not 200 years old. However, beings from the original Constellation do exist in the hull of this ship.
The museum has always tried to keep an open mind when it comes to dealing with these types of phenomenon. Because there is documentation in the historic record that talks about unexplained events taking place on board the ship, it would seem somewhat quick of us to simply dismiss them out of hand. However, with the stories that pertain to the original frigate Constellation, such as the ones regarding Commodore Truxton, they do become somewhat fantastic when one keeps in mind that the 3 most pervasive stories associated with Constellation actually don't even pertain to this ship. They pertain to this ship's predecessor, the frigate Constellation, which was cut up for scrap in 1853.
The museum kind of takes a neutral view, and we let people make their own decisions, come to their own conclusions. There may or may not be some sort of paranormal activity on board. I have not ever witnessed it myself. I've been told that some people have. I know, from my own personal experience, wandering around the ship in the dark at night on occasion, that it can be a little unnerving down there. There you can certainly imagine someone from the ship's distant past appearing and telling you which way to turn and what to look for.
Well, there is a lot of history regarding ghosts here that would tend to suggest that. The Constellation definitely has the possibility of actually being haunted.
Despite the skepticism voiced by museum personnel, Vince Wilson and his team make plans to come again. They will continue to collect the evidence needed to build a case for paranormal activity below the decks of the USS Constellation. Helen Peters was jogging along Burlington Bay early one morning. As she stopped to cool down, she noticed a patch of fog over the water. It seemed to be moving into shore. As the eerie white mist drifted closer, she could make out an old ship emerging from the fog. Suddenly, there was a blood-curdling scream. Fearing someone was in trouble, she ran towards the sound. The screaming escalated, seeming to come from all directions. Then, just as suddenly, the mist cleared, and there was no ship in sight. The screaming abruptly stopped, and she was alone on the empty shore. Jem Hormer and 2 mates were unloading a shipload of quarry rocks onto the pier. Jem slipped and lost his footing, wedging his leg into a small crevice between the dock and the boat. Before he could get his injured leg out, the boat rolled into the dock and crushed his leg. His screams of agony could be heard for miles. His leg was horribly mangled, and he was crying in pain. Jem's shipmates were a callous pair. with no fondness for Jem Horner. Hoping to claim his share of the wages, they pulled him away from the boat and left him to die at the back door of a nearby tavern. The tavern owner heard Jem's screams, dragged the injured man inside, and called a doctor. When the doctor arrived, Jem was in extreme pain. He had lost a lot of blood and was losing life. The leg was so mangled, it couldn't be saved. The doctor made a grim decision to amputate immediately. The operation would have to be performed right there in the back room of the tavern. It was a brutal procedure with no anesthesia and the most basic of tools. But despite the doctor's best efforts, Jem had already lost too much blood and did not survive the operation. The doctor gave the tavern owner Jem's amputated leg with instructions to bury it, but the tavern owner didn't think it was right to bury the man without his leg, so he put it in a keg of whiskey to preserve it until the funeral. In a gruesome turn of events, the very same shipmates who had left Jem to die outside the tavern came upon the keg and stole it. They stayed up all night drinking whiskey. It wasn't until 2 days later, when an inquest was called, that they discovered Jem's severed leg had been in the keg they were drinking from. Patrick Cross and his team from Burlington Ghost and Haunting Researchers have been documenting the Jem Horner ghost for a number of years.
Okay, we're here at the inlet, the actual location, the original Burlington Bay, and this is where we believe Jem Horner's ghost really is, including many people hearing his deathly screams that still resonate in the air today. Right on the shoreline here where all the rocks are, this is the best spot with a perfect view where the actual boat came in and where you can actually get the best sighting and possibly sounds and the ghost sounds of Jem Horner himself that appear right in this area. In order to find ghost activity, usually this is a standard compass and it would pick up electromagnetic field energy. There it goes. It was in one of the areas that's more active. There it goes. Yeah, there it goes. This is a digital thermometer, meaning that you can actually, the temperature go up and down within plus and minus 1 degree. If the temperature drops in a matter of seconds, you will actually see that. Although we're outdoors, there is a bit of a cold spot here, meaning it's colder than it is on this side here. So I do feel a lot of cold air around Michelle, especially. As you notice, the compass is going crazy right now. The temperature is dropping drastically. So this would be a typical good example. Now, why is there EMF or energy here? Because this is all rock and wood, so it shouldn't be anything electrical whatsoever. So ghosts are made up of electrons, positive and negative electrons, and there is a lot of activity here. And now it's probably still dropping. It's still dropping over here. So it was constant here, it's still dropping. Look at that, look at that. It's really going now. A lot of activity over here. That's bizarre.
Wow.
And of course, temperature is still dropping. I'm feeling a lot of cold air right here. Most of the times you won't get this because the compass will stay due north. The only way this can happen is if there is a lot of ghost activity around us. And it's now dropped to 60.4. When I go back over here, it goes back up again. It starts going back. So there is a lot of the cold air, cold presence right in this spot here. which is the area probably where Jim was working or had died.
Did you hear that?
I heard that.
That was a little thump.
Well, that's not. That shouldn't be there, because there's nothing there.
I know.
Why there? We just. That sounded like a boat, a thumping of a boat.
Exactly, yeah.
We just heard that.
Bang.
Yeah, it was like a boat banging against the shore.
Yeah.
And that's typical what you'd hear: boats crashing or the screams.
Yeah.
Okay, as we were emerging out from the other side, there was a bit of ghost energy in there, and when we investigated this previous by the actual shores and the rocks, we found other ghost energy as well as we got ghost ectoplasm and mist.
Ooh, that might feel good. Really? Want to
Right
try?
here. Okay, try there. It is. Putting it right in here.
Let's try it like that.
Yeah, it's really freezing right here. Right here, Jim. You're right. It's freezing.
But it's
It is. It's really cold as opposed to over there. It's nice and warm. It's freezing right here. Yeah.
could be moving around as well.
Well, you were like you said, you're getting an orb. Look here, Michelle. Feel this. Holy cow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Oh man, it's a really large amount.
How strange is that?
It's gone. It's gone again. There it is. It's like warm. See?
It's moving, look.
Yeah. That's just unreal.
I think Jim is very curious as to what we're all doing out here tonight, because we're feeling him very strong and getting a lot of pockets of energy. There he goes.
It's like we're being observed by what we're observing. It's like the hunter is now being the hunted. It's the ghosts are now watching us. We're trying to look for ghosts, but yet they're watching us.
It's little pockets, but it's concentrated energy. It's just freezing right here. Over here, it's gone, and it's right around. Mostly Michelle and Jim right now. When we first came down here, we were getting very little active energy, and now we've attracted, and they're excited. Now they're all over the place over here, because we're open to it. We're calling on it, and it seems to be here.
I really got the impression that we were being watched the entire time. I know we talked about that a little bit tonight, but I really felt as though we were not the ones really doing the investigating, that we had ghosts, basically investigating us. They were very curious as to what we were doing, and of course I was really fascinated by the large bang that we heard tonight, because when we rushed out to the lake, there was literally nothing there, and that was pretty impressive.
Nearly 170 years later, there have been numerous sightings of a ghost ship in the harbor and reports of Jim Horner's screams heard across the bay. They hope to find new evidence for their file on Jim Horner's ghost. If you happen to come down to Burlington Bay, take a moment to listen for Jim Horner's screams. You may even see a phantom ship or see Jim Horner's ghost hobbling along the rocky shore.